is it legal? Or at least is this not unpatriotic? Some clients then think, oh, that's like that for everybody in Switzerland. Everybody operates like that. Hollywood idea of secret bank accounts and hush-hush offices and things like that, And some people still walk around a bit with those kind of conceptions. But that's changed. This is like decades ago almost now. We've grown out of it completely.
Welcome to Swiss Money Secrets, your go-to podcast for insights on offshore investing and banking from the trusted Swiss perspective. Let's get into it.
So, welcome back to the Swiss Money Secrets podcast. We're excited to welcome on the great and powerful Anne Liebgott, returning after too many years, but a returning guest here. We're going to be talking about Swiss IRAs, serving Americans, kind of the evolution, getting your perspective in on everything that you do, everything you've seen, especially with Americans Welcome. Before we get into that, we always talk about a news topic, a very interesting topic today, which is Elon Musk's Starlink is trying to build 40 radio towers in Valais, which is in the southern part of Switzerland, southern west part of Switzerland, I guess you could say, in the mountains. Actually, it's my Swiss family's Heimatort. So it's a little bit interesting. Jamie, what do you think about this? You're the one who brought this topic up, actually.
Well, I mean, it's almost your Heimatort, so maybe you have to jump in as an almost local Walliser. It was just fascinating to me because I looked at it from like a local politician, like political standpoint, and that a handful of people are like essentially trying to fight Elon Musk. I like that as not that I have any issue with him personally. I don't know him obviously, but I think it's interesting that we have such a direct democracy, that people who take issue with Starlink and Elon Musk's projects, or I guess him as a person as well, that they are essentially rising. Just a handful of them saying, we don't want those satellites here. We think they're a risk. It's interesting. I don't think that they will be very successful, but it's always interesting to see how people react to those kinds of developments. What are your thoughts?
I think it's one of the pieces kind of to carry on to the point of, where you feel like you don't have power as an individual often in life. But in Switzerland, you do inside of your town, right? I mean, Leuch is a very small town. It's not big.
It's like 4,000 people.
Yeah. It's a village, really, on the side of a mountain. It's beautiful. Everyone should go and visit there at some point if you're in Switzerland.
Shout out to Leuch.
Yeah, it is wonderful. But they have some sort of ability to kind of protest, and I like that it's kind of been picked up in Swiss media to be discussed. I mean, obviously, polarizing figure of Elon Musk, Starlink, an interesting technological development, that's breaking barriers, being used all over the world for various reasons. But it is interesting to see those for and against. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Not really, except that I think that it's always a pity if there are some kind of, let's say, modern technical developments and people try and pull the brake on them.
Sure.
That I'm not a big fan of myself.
Yeah. And I mean, the president, or I guess mayor of Leuch, he's very much a fan. Like, he wanted to get this project because it's also going to create jobs for the village. It's going to bring innovation to the place. So I think there's pro and there's contra, and it's nice that it's being publicly debated.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of direct democracy, right? In Switzerland, and even small communities have that against big players, even on the big scheme. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But with that, I think it's good to shift into our topic today. And I'd love if you'd introduce yourself a little bit more to our audience, what you do, before we kind of start rolling in, especially Americans Welcome Switzerland. It would be fun for them to know who you are and what you do.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's great to be back after, you're right, it's been quite a few years that we've sat together and had a chance to discuss what has been going on in the Swiss SEC Registered Investment Advisor scene, if you want to call it that. My name is Anne Liebgott, and I run the Swiss platform called americanswelcome.swiss. Also known as AW Switzerland. It's been up and running for about 11 years now. And especially this year, it has got a lot more attention than it has in the past. There's a lot of organic growth, a lot of people getting in contact with me to discuss like what you do, providing Swiss wealth management services to American clients. That's the basis of the platform, the core that has been at the core from the beginning, but it also includes other wealth management related service providers like trust providers or even citizenship and residence planning and things like that. And it's always evolving. It's a never ending story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's for me as an American, it's always difficult whenever we're planning trips to the States, trying to find the right business partners, trying to find the right partners cross-border and starting at home by yourself. It's always hard to find that entry point. And that's something I've always really admired about Americans Welcome Switzerland is like you have this entry into seeing kind of what exists to you at one contact point, something I've really found to be of value in general. I mean, obviously, because we're
it's meant to be a practical resource.
Yes, and it very much is so.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe it'd be interesting if you could give just like a quick Swiss RIAs, registered investment advisors, kind of why are they here? Who are they? Why do they exist from your perspective, working with them?
Okay. Swiss SEC registered advisors, they come in all shapes and sizes. Okay. You have, for example, the ones from bigger banks that have decided, we also want to serve American clients. We need a separate entity and it needs to be registered with the SEC. And so they have founded one. And it goes all the way down to, let's say, the one-man show and everything in between for people who want to serve American clients that are mostly based in the US, but they can come from anywhere around the world. And some of them, however, they only got registered with the SEC because they had to, because let's say they had a large client who became a U.S. person, maybe moved to the United States, and let's just say has 100 million assets under management with them, and they didn't want to lose that client. So they got registered with the SEC. And there's quite a few of those as well. So they're not really active on the U.S. market. They just did it because they wanted to keep a client that became a U.S. person. And those are not that interesting for Americans that are in the United States and that are looking for diversification opportunities, because these ones aren't really out to look for new clients. But there's other ones that are. Particularly, they've committed themselves to work with American clients in the U.S. market. They even, like yourselves, they travel to the U.S., they meet with clients, they meet with prospects, they meet with new business partners and so on. And those are, let's say, from my point of view, from the platform, the more interesting ones, of course, because they're the ones that, are looking for new clients coming from the U.S.
Maybe we can take a step back and briefly talk about why and when a company has to register with the SEC and why it is of value to a U.S. person to work with a company that is SEC registered.
Okay. Well, the reason why is that if a Swiss company is not registered with the SEC, then they cannot serve American clients. It's simply just not allowed. There's a so-called 1525 rule. That's a bit of an exception, but that is if you're wanting to build up your business in the U.S., you don't even want to start operating under the so-called 1525 rule, meaning you can have up to 15 clients and not more altogether than 25 million assets under management. You don't want to do that. And my platform, AmericansWelcome.Swiss, does not list those companies, because I've always said if you want to expand your business, you're going to have to get registered so. You're going to have to do it. So might as well start with that and not try with this 1525 rule. So I think for an American in the United States, it's important for them that they actually know I'm dealing with a Swiss company that has gone through the steps and it's got registered with the SEC and can work with me completely compliant.
Yeah, and I think that's big. I mean, especially on the internet, anyone can create a website, right?
Yeah.
And you can list everything, but having that reputation and understanding that deep background of why is it that they're registered, why is it important that they need to be registered, so that you can give a resource to someone that's going to really hold whatever solution they're looking for.
Yeah, of course.
And I think what do you think are the core kind of benefits for Americans looking for Swiss registered investment advisor services?
Well, for an American, especially these days, what is the reason for diversification? I mean, of course, they're not going to take all their assets and send all their assets to Switzerland and run as fast as they can from the U.S. tax man or something like that. They're actually wanting to diversify their assets. They're wanting to have maybe some of them do it also to have like a safe nest egg abroad. Others just want to have a different investments in their portfolio. The idea is not that a Swiss SEC registered investment advisor is competing with a U.S. advisor. That's not the idea. The idea is that they complement the offering that the U.S. advisor has. And a Swiss investment advisor, of course, just has a broader perspective of the world, and they can complement, like I said, what the U.S. advisor knows very, very well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a conversation we have a lot with potential or interested parties in our services is, like it's always this back and forth, right, between their U.S. advisor. Sometimes, not always, actually, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes American investment advisors are very open to the idea because they realize they can't offer the same thing. But then sometimes there's that struggle, right, between someone looking to lose AUM, and so they're telling the person, "Are you sure it's real? Is this not a scam? Whatever," just to disincentivize kind of that move. But at the end, exactly your point of this is complementary.
Yeah, and I think as well is that a lot of Americans are beginning to also realize that it's not always beneficial to have a home bias. It's not always beneficial to have like a U.S. only, U.S. centric investment portfolio. There are other countries, there are other investments, there are other wealth managers, and so on. And so they like to take advantage of that as well. And I think that's also really important from the Swiss side is that the Swiss, they know that. And they can offer then the U.S. client a wider array of investment opportunities than just sticking to a U.S.-centric portfolio.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why our company certainly, but also quite a few of our competitors exclude the U.S. market and U.S. dollar-denominated investments, not because it doesn't make any sense, but they have it covered in the U.S. already. You can do that more easily, more cost-efficiently from within the U.S., so it makes sense to just move a portion of your wealth overseas, have that managed by someone else in another geographical region, and then keep your U.S.-based advisor, if you're happy with them, to have the US-centric portfolio as an addition.
Yeah, definitely. And that's usually what happens as well. But there are Swiss SEC registered investment advisors that do include or do not exclude, put it that way, do not exclude US based investments from the portfolio if that's what the client wants.
Sure.
Of course.
Okay?
Yeah. I mean, that's always
it's the client's wish, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if the client says, please exclude them, I only want to have Swiss, just for example, I only want to have Swiss-based investments versus, let's say, other places in the world, then fine. Because the portfolios are usually very tailor-made to what the clients actually would like to have.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same for us. We also have some US connected people who live in Switzerland. And of course, they have a different approach to their portfolios and they might very well benefit from the US market. So I fully agree. I mean, what the client wants and needs is always the most important thing. And that's one of the reasons why we only have tailored portfolios, because there is no one size fits all when it comes to investing. There's so many different factors that contribute into what is best for the person involved.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's the other side it's the diversification of investment, diversification geographically, but also the mindset, right? And that's something you touched on. I remember something that, we've been looking at is, there's always been kind of this competitive nature between US RIAs and Swiss RIAs, right? That's kind of the mindset. They must be against each other. And for me, I realized at some point, hey, maybe we need to even be looking at these as potential partners to servicing clients properly, right? There's this big demand, as you mentioned this year, there's this big push of Americans looking for financial services abroad. And I was talking with a US-based financial advisor, and we were sitting there chatting back and forth over lunch. And he said, so you've really bought into this anti-American, bullish Swiss and European market. I said, well, if you're investing abroad, don't you want someone who's looking for the opportunities? And it would be the same if I'm looking to invest in the States. I want someone who really knows the markets, who sees the opportunities, who understands the markets, and that's where I'm going to put my U.S. investments, with someone like that. And I'm not going to, if I want full diversification globally, I'm not going to go to a person who's only biased on the U.S., right? And it's that diversification of mindset as well, coming to understanding. I mean, the U.S. market is huge already.
Yeah, and I think an important point is that from a U.S. advisor's perspective, I mean, all SEC registered investment advisors, be them in the U.S. or in Switzerland or anywhere else, they have a fiduciary duty. Okay, it's an obligation. They have a fiduciary obligation to act in their clients' best interests. And if you're a U.S. advisor and you completely ignore international diversification, you completely ignore that aspect, or even, like I said, jurisdictional diversification of holding a portion of your assets outside of the U.S. banking system, then you're not necessarily really holding up to your fiduciary obligations, because you're not even offering your client, or you're not giving them an insight into what could be possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't like this idea that we're competing. I like the idea that one is cooperating and collaborating together to have a great solution for the client.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? And not just ignoring, let's say, Switzerland, and that's from the Swiss people also, not just ignoring what's going on in the U.S.
Yeah.
I think that's important, that it's more of a collaboration than a competition.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in your experience, what types of Americans are really drawn kind of to the Swiss RIA mindset, looking to set up a bank account in Liechtenstein, Switzerland? Do you see kind of a trend there, or is it pretty broad across?
Let me give you a couple of examples, what I've experienced this year. And I've had some intensive discussions with people who, despite the platform being direct contact to the service provider, they've been wanting to discuss with me because, oh, you're neutral, and you know everything, and you're neutral, and oh, we want to discuss this with you. So I've had quite a good insight into the reasons why. And global mobility plays a strong role. Actually, people that are considering maybe retiring abroad, or they need to, they have businesses abroad, or they're establishing businesses abroad. And they have this global mobility factor is one of the strong factors that's in there. Also for the next generation. Like, what about my kids? My children, they want to go and study in Europe. They want to spend time in Europe. They don't want to live their whole life in the U.S. like the older generation has. And, they have their home somewhere and they want to stay there and so on. The younger generation is more interested in going out there, and experiencing the world. And so there's people that are saying, well, we want to get prepared for that. We need to be prepared. We have to send our kids to great schools where they have a great education, and we have to prepare for the idea of living abroad and holding assets abroad and opening up companies abroad and so on. And I think that's also a mindset shift, okay, over the years, in that this whole idea of having to stay in one country and having to stay in the U.S. where born there, grew up there, stay there, that has also expanded, And like I said, the next generation is actually pushing that even more.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to see just where they differentiate. I think some strong things that we've seen this year, Jamie, maybe you can touch probably a little bit more than I can even on this, but just having a different banking jurisdiction that's in a stable environment is often one of the biggest reasons that I hear.
Yeah, certainly. That's a big one that I hear as well. And then also just the worry about the devaluation of the US dollar is something. I mean, we have been talking about this and had conversation about this for decades as a company now, but this year we really saw an increase in worry from people in the US that they are losing their purchasing power with the US dollar in the long term. And we had a lot of people who were very eager to get out of the dollar quickly. I think also with the current administration being quite vocal about having an interest in a weaker US dollar, that's probably something that is moving this push forward as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I can't remember another time in my lifetime, but I mean, there's a good 10 years before the age of 10 that I wasn't paying attention to politics, but it's a slight humor. I wasn't paying attention, but I can't remember presidents ever coming out, or administrations ever coming out and openly saying we want a weaker dollar. It's been weakening for decades. Their actions have been showing it, but I think that might be one of the first times I've ever heard a president say that in the U.S. Have you ever heard that before?
Well, I mean, without getting into any details, there's a whole bunch of economics around weaker
Of
currencies
course.
and
Yeah,
things like that about, attracting investments and
Sure.
I'm not going to get into that
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. So there are always reasons,
Yes.
to say, let's have a weaker currency. What I think is that in investing in general, most often investors are trying to win the game. Okay.
Sure.
So if they can carve out some benefit of having a stronger currency, and they can see, I can do that rather easily, and it seems to be a long-term trend and so on, then they like to do that because they actually want to win the game. If at the end of the day, the dollar weakens or doesn't weaken or so on, that one sees going down the road. In this case with the US dollar, yes, it has been a long-term trend. I mean, since actually they stopped with Bretton Woods going that far back. There's been some short-term reversals, but it has been actually a long-term trend. And so people that have been holding Swiss francs, when they transfer that back to the US dollar amount, they've had a huge, actually, increase in the value of their assets because they're taking their Swiss francs and they're, turning it into the US dollar, and then they can see that.
Yeah.
They can see the difference there. And I think that has a lot to do with it, that people just think, oh, if I can find a way, to win this game, then they'll do that.
Sure. And it's always time horizon perspective, I mean, in the sense of it's not I always want to say there's no investment advice here, right? So it's not that it's a for sure game that you will exchange into Swiss franc and have huge gains just in the currency exchange. That's, not what we're trying to say, but we do see that long-term trend of that taking place over a really long time horizon.
And I think it's not, again, like we don't do any in-depth currency analysis here, but the point is diversification, right? If you have all your eggs in one basket, you are more prone to risk because all your risk is tied to one market and one currency that can go up and down. If you have it distributed onto a variety of currencies, then you just have more overall stability in your wealth. And
Absolutely.
I mean, when we build a portfolio, typically we don't have a portfolio just consisting of Swiss franc. We also diversify into a variety of different currencies that we believe have upwards potential against the US dollar, because we very much believe that you shouldn't be in just one single market, and that also goes for Switzerland.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that adds a lot of value. I think another question which would be really interesting to get your take, and how have you seen Swiss RIAs kind of change or develop over the last couple years, 3-5 years?
First of all, there has been a bit of a consolidation of the SEC RIA asset managers. One of the reasons as well is that Swiss law has also adopted new regulation. This has been going on for a couple of years. They have to be FINMA licensed as a portfolio manager. And some of these companies, they said, oh, no, we don't want to bother with that whole process. Either we're too old, or we want to give up the business, or we didn't really want to do it any longer, and so on. So they have merged with other companies, or they have sold their interests to other companies, and so on. So that over the last couple of years, since these new FINMA regulations have been adopted, that has been noticeable, and so on. But what I also see now is that there are quite a few new Swiss wealth managers that are interested in getting registered with the SEC. Okay, and now there has been a moratorium on getting registered for several years, and now that moratorium is lifted. And so now there are more companies that are in the registration process because they say we would like to access the US market. It's, where are the most millionaires? Where are the most billionaires in the world? Well, they're in the US market. And they feel that they are comfortable with actually providing services to the clients in the US. A lot of these companies also, they have long-term relationships with lawyers or wealth managers or other asset protection lawyers and things like that in the US. And so it's actually it's a mutually beneficial, let's say, working agreement to work with each other. Okay, so there's been more collaboration going on than I think at the beginning when they just started to look for the U.S. clients directly. Now there's more collaboration with other professionals in the U.S.
That's interesting, because I also see a little bit more of a spirit of collaboration in Switzerland, and I wonder if that's also a bit of a generational shift that I don't know if that's the case or not, but the people that haven't been in business for so long are seeking more partnerships and are more collaborative than people that have been in business for longer. I don't know if that's true. Just something that I have been observing.
I think the more open the world gets, and it's always evolving, and there's more openness out there, and people are more willing to discuss. They're more willing to discuss new things. They're more willing to take a look at new things. They're more willing to read about new things and educate themselves about new things. And that's a big issue also in the US, is that a lot of people, they're simply not aware of the availability of Swiss wealth management for US clients. And I've heard that a lot, where people have called me and they said, but I thought we couldn't do this. And I go, yes, you can, of course, under these and these, like I said, circumstances, like you have to have an SEC registered investment advisor to work with you with a Swiss bank and so on. And I think it's a lot of matter of education, just becoming more aware. And social media, like you guys do it very, very well. That's also one source of where people are saying, oh, I never thought about this before. Yeah. Oh, now I'm hearing about it. Well, I'm going to explore. I'm going to explore and take a look further. Yeah. And a lot of times people don't make the decision like this. They don't make it overnight. It takes a year or maybe even 2 years of listening, learning, finding out, meeting, watching, reading, and so on, before they actually say, yes, now I'm ready. Now I'm actually ready to take that step and hold a portion of my assets abroad.
I mean, the world hasn't just gotten more open, it has also gotten more complex. There's more regulatory requirements, there's more regulation, more rules to adhere to. And I think that on one hand also like fosters the collaboration, because you very quickly need experts in other fields that you might not be an expert yourself. And it has also motivated us to do this content that we have been doing for quite a few years now, because as you just said, it's knowledge is power, and it's important to us that people know about the options and that they have their questions answered and that they can do thorough due diligence, because for a long time it has been very mystical what we do, and a lot of people didn't really understand it, didn't know where to go to. And I think social media and the internet has really given us a great platform to just educate people and tell them what's out there, and then they can make the decision for themselves. Yes, exactly.
It makes you very approachable, because people are thinking, oh, they're not so... Yeah, they're across the ocean, but they're not that far away, and they're speaking to me, and they're going to listen to me, and they're going to answer my questions. And just to get back to these, some of these phone calls I've had this past half year, I had one fellow who decided to invest in Switzerland, and he went through the process of reading their ADV Part 2s and so on and so on. And at the end, he had 3 companies that he thought, oh, these would be most interesting to me. And so he was asking me these questions, which of course I couldn't answer in detail because I'm not part of these companies per se. But, I said to him, it's very, very good that you're doing your homework.
Yeah.
That you're actually taking the time and reading the ADV Part 2 brochure. That's what it's there for. Yeah. And you really are writing down the questions, and you're trying at least to make comparisons to a certain extent where it's possible and so on. And you're really doing a thorough homework. Yeah. And that's going to make you feel comfortable in your step in doing so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was the whole reason that we even branched out. And I mean, being able to, in social media with podcasts that Jamie started 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah. 5 years ago.
Getting older.
Yeah. 5 years ago, but also just all the short things that we do, everything that we're doing is educational. When I, as an American, really started to understand the power of what this is, for the picture or wealth picture, it was like I felt like I was an evangelist. It's like I just wanted to tell people, and it's what's I think has really kept a lot of this going through the hard times of not getting any kind of interest, even though we're putting a lot of time and effort into this educational content. At the end, I mean, you just have to keep informing people, and it's certainly an interesting thing that I think more Americans now so than ever are starting to open their eyes up to it. And learn and take that time.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that people do their due diligence because it's such a trust-based business and relationship. They really have to feel comfortable with who they're working with. So to take a little bit of extra time and then feel comfortable with the choice that you have made, I think is time worth spending on that
Definitely. And I think it's also very important that they ask questions.
Yes.
Because of course you can get a lot of information from the ADV Part 2 brochure. You can get a lot of information from a website or something like that. But you really need to ask questions. And sometimes people are a little bit hesitant to ask another question. Like, oh, I've already asked so many questions. I'm going to ask more questions. I say, ask all the questions that people like yourselves. You love answering questions.
Of course.
You don't sit there and say, oh, no, this guy's asking me another question. No. You're like, hey, if we can help you understand this better and make you feel comfortable with it, we're more than happy to answer your questions. And I think that's something that that the Americans kind of hesitate sometimes to say, oh, should I ask more questions? And I always say, go for it.
Yeah, and I hate it when people apologize for asking a supposedly dumb question, because it's like this. We have been doing this for years and years and years, and what we do is complex and it's complicated. And how would you know if you have been a scientist or a business owner or a doctor? Like, why would you know about this? Of course, you have to ask questions, and they are not dumb. It's much more worrisome to me if someone has absolutely no questions, because that then shows me that they probably haven't really thought about it. If you start thinking about it, questions will come up, and that's what we're here for, to clarify, does this make sense
and I think
or not?
This is also very, very important after they have become a client.
Yes.
Not just beforehand.
Yes.
Is that when questions pop up, they should just ask them and not feel, I know in general one says, oh, we take a look, we have a conversation or something, let's say once a quarter, just as an example. Okay. But if somebody feels they want to have a conversation this week because of some, activities that have happened in the world or something like that, then go for it, then ask.
Of course.
And don't feel that just because they're farther away physically, that means that you can't ask questions. And I think that's just very, very important that they that the clients, the U.S. clients, that they feel comfortable before they become a client, but also while they are a client.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely vital. We do a lot of meetings at the beginning and ongoing with clients, and that's what I always tell them is, look, if you have any question, if you forget, if it's the same question, ask me again. And it's something even I had to get, over in the learning and growing process as a human being. If I don't know something, I will continue not knowing it until I ask a question.
Yes, of course.
And so I think that's really, really good points. I do want to ask about the SEC was in Switzerland recently doing a round of audits on Swiss RIAs. What kind of came about of that? Have you seen any impact on how Swiss RIAs operated after the SEC's been through? I mean, we talked about now that the SEC has lifted that moratorium that new people can register, but have you seen any kind of changes there?
Not really changes, except the awareness that the SEC will actually at some point in time do an examination. Until now, it has not been the case. The reason being that the SEC could only do a physical audit on the ground, and they were not able to handle this whole thing electronically. Once they developed that method of being able to handle things electronically, now was the time then to say, okay, in that case, we can do an examination. And there were some issues about data transfer and so on between the FINMA and the SEC. And the SEC said, listen, we're going to examine 9 companies up front. Didn't say which ones, informed FINMA which ones, but didn't say it publicly which ones. And FINMA informed those investment advisors and said, now you're going to have an examination. And this is how we've agreed on with data transfer and things like that. And I think what I like about that whole thing that Swiss companies became examined is that it puts them on a level playing field with their American SEC RIAs. Why should Switzerland be like a black box? Where an American might say, yeah, but they've never been audited. They've never been examined, or they're like treated differently and so on. And I think that was the best thing that could happen to the Swiss SEC RIAs is that it's put on the same level field like everybody else. They're up to the same regulations, they're examined the same, and so on and so forth. So I think the companies, they just had to become aware of that an examination can happen and will happen. And that means having your books and all your records and everything, up to date and all perfect, basically. And what I've heard is that the few that have been completely finished, that are concluded, it's been smooth running. Everybody knows that when you have an SEC examination, there's a so-called, you get a letter at the end saying what's not right and what you need to fix and so on. And of course, they got some of those letters, but these were minor points that were actually rectified, and then business goes on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Jamie, do you have any thoughts on that either?
No, I don't have any thoughts on it. I share Anne's sentiments. I don't know anything about it firsthand, so it's interesting for me to hear as well. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
The question is just, when are they going to start again with their next round?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. And it was actually considered that it would happen this October, but because of the U.S. government shutdown, everything went flatline. So at the moment, there's nothing in the air about further examinations, but I personally hope that they happen.
I'm sure they will happen. Will be a question of time.
And the sooner the better, because like I said, I love this idea of it being a fair, level playing field.
Yeah, that's good to know. I would kind of want to shift to understand maybe some of the, we talked about what types of Americans is drawing, what are the kind of themes. What are some of the misconceptions that you've seen, I guess, Americans walking into the whole process that they have?
One of the misconceptions that I see is that, is it legal? Is this legal? Or at least, is this not unpatriotic? Some of them they're mainstream America and the news and everything that goes on there and so on. Whenever there's a Swiss issue or something like that, of course we call it what we call Swiss bashing. There's some of that going on, and some clients then think, oh, that's like that for everybody in Switzerland. Everybody operates like that. It's like that everywhere all the time, and all this old-fashioned, Hollywood idea of secret bank accounts and everything, hush-hush offices and things like that, and some people still walk around a bit with those kind of conceptions, but that's changed. This is like decades ago almost now. this whole Hollywood aspect of Swiss bank accounts and so on we've grown out of it completely. And so on. So I think that's one of the misconceptions. Another misconception could also be that it's hard for me to get out once I'm in. That they think, well, it's kind of what happens then? Like, how am I going to get my money back? That kind of thing. And, Switzerland is so transparent in anything that has to do with money transfers and holding assets and things like that. And if you want your money back for whatever reason, sometimes there's a reason for it. You want to buy a bigger house, or there's an emergency in the family and you need to take your money back, or at least a portion of it. Well, it's the easiest thing in the world. Okay. It is not something that's difficult. It's not something that's going to, you're going to have to fight for or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a bit of a misconception that they think, but once it's over there, how am I going to get my money back?
Yeah.
And that's actually not an issue at all.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. I mean, obviously there's different banks do different things in Switzerland than how they function in the States. So there's some technical things that might look different than like a US domestic wire. But other than that, yeah, you're 100% right.
I mean, we guide the client through everything. Yeah. So I would say it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on that point. And I think to the misconception points, whenever the Swiss bashing happens, especially by US politicians, it's always fascinating to see how empty their bashing is, because we know how it functions. So when you hear it and you're like, well, that doesn't hold any water, what they're saying, they're just trying to throw something out there.
Exactly. Well, you can always pick points, pick and pick. I mean, you can do things like that. Everyone can everywhere about everything. But in general, I agree that the Swiss stability, long-term stability, political stability, economic stability, that those are still, arguments that really pull people towards Switzerland, and not just Americans. I mean, we have to see that. I mean, Switzerland is home to over 25% or around 25% of all private wealth management globally.
Yes.
So we can't just say it's just, for the Americans. It's just been made easier for the Americans through these SEC registered investment advisors who are dedicated actually to serving American clients, be them, like I said, domiciled in the US or domiciled abroad.
Elsewhere. Yeah, absolutely. Where do you see the trends, I guess, of Swiss IRAs in the next 3 to 5 years heading? Do you see them becoming stronger? Especially for U.S. focused people, do you see any trends? Do you think, that can span the board, right? Whether they're going to be more people doing like what we're doing in terms of education material. I think
one thing what is very attractive about Switzerland and Swiss registered investment advisors is that they're consistent. And they're not fluttering around, and they're not, one day it's like this and the next day it's like that and whatever. It's a consistent process that improves, of course, because everything improves with time, basically. And I think that that's what a client can really appreciate, is that it's consistent and that it's long-term and that it continues and goes on. I think one point also is the so-called resilience, that people in this business in Switzerland realize the necessity of being resilient, of bouncing back when things might be a bit more difficult, geopolitically and so on and so forth, that they think and they know and they operate that way, that they don't just stand there like, a deer in the headlights, that they're resilient and they have, contingency plans and they actually know how to react to things that are happening in the world.
So what would you say to that U.S. person who's looking at Switzerland, is a little bit unsure, hasn't decided? What would you say, and they're considering, using a Swiss registered investment advisor? What would you say to them to give them some clarity, or at least point them in the right direction?
Well, I think, first of all, if they're interested enough to get started, then they do see a value in the whole proposition. Okay, it's just a matter of getting there, and there as well. I say you don't have to start with a huge amount. You can start with an amount that you feel comfortable with, and then you can see if you want to increase that over time. And a lot of people, they think, well, it's only for the super rich. It's only for the, ultra high net worth individuals, and I have to bring at least 10 million, and otherwise, I won't get any service. That's not true at all. As far as I know, your minimum amount of investment is about 500,000. Okay, so let's just say if you feel more comfortable with starting with that kind of amount, that's good. You can always increase it as time passes by. Personally, I think if you've already considered it, you've already done a lot of homework, you don't really have to overthink it. I think then go for it. And you'll see as time goes by that you actually did make a right decision and you don't have to worry about it.
Very good. How is Americans Welcome Switzerland or .Swiss? What are you guys doing to help educate and inform Americans about this opportunity that exists to them?
Well, basically, it's just a very, very handy online platform. So there's no sign up, there's no signing in. You don't have to give your name and your email address or anything like that. There's no filters. There's no Google ads or things like that, or, sponsors trying to convince you to take this direction or that direction. It is really just a neutral directory. And that makes it easy for people to walk through it. It makes it easy for them to browse. It makes it easy for them to look, and they know not one is being pushed more than another. Okay, because it's neutral. And like I mentioned before, that's why people actually like to speak with me, because they say, I know you're not trying to push a particular company or a particular service or a particular product, and I think that's important, that they have a neutral ground where they can go in and they can take a look and, like I've mentioned before, spend time on doing their homework, their due diligence, and easily getting in contact with somebody to talk to from each of these companies.
Yeah.
And we will certainly link to the website in the show notes, so people who are interested, who have made it this far into the conversation, can go check out N's website and look around. Yeah.
Is there anywhere that they can follow you on social media, which we'll put in the show notes as well, but you can say it now.
I have to say my preferred social media channel is LinkedIn, because we're talking to professionals. I don't do things like TikTok videos or things like that. I mean, Americans Welcome is present on various social media channels, but I'd say the most active and the best one for what we do is LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. And thank you so much for joining us, spending time speaking about Swiss IRAs. We look forward to seeing you anytime other in Zurich. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Jess.
Thanks again for joining us on this episode of the Swiss Money Secrets podcast. If you would like to learn more about WHVP and what we do, check us out on our website at whvp.ch. Or you can check us out on any of our social media handles on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram by simply searching WHVP. Have a great rest of your day.